It starts with a text message at 2 a.m. Someone you barely know is falling apart and somehow they chose you to catch them. You're exhausted, your own problems are stacking up like unpaid bills, but you pick up the phone anyway because that's what you do. This is how it begins. Not with a conscious decision to become everyone's emotional support system, but with a pattern so quiet you don't notice it forming. One conversation turns into 10, 10 turns into 100, and suddenly you realize you've spent years holding space for everyone's pain except your own. You might call yourself a good friend. People might call you a saint, the one who always knows what to say, who never judges, who shows up no matter what. But deep down, in the hours when you're finally alone, there's a question that keeps whispering in the dark. Who holds you when you're falling apart? Who listens when you need to be heard? Who sees that behind your wisdom and your patience, you're drowning in everyone else's storms? This is the psychology of the therapist friend. The person who gives endlessly but struggles to receive. The one who fixes others while quietly breaking themselves. And if you've ever been that person, you know it's not just exhausting. It's a silent form of self-abandonment. A slow disappearance behind a role you never asked for but can't seem to escape. And today, we're going deep into why it happens, what it costs, and how the very thing that makes you feel needed is the same thing that's destroying you from the inside out. Because here's the truth nobody talks about. Being the therapist friend isn't actually about helping people, it's about avoiding yourself. It's about staying so busy with everyone else's emotional chaos that you never have to face your own. Let me show you how this pattern forms. It often starts in childhood, in homes where emotional needs were dangerous to express. Maybe you had a parent who was struggling, depressed, overwhelmed, or angry, and you learned early that your job was to manage their feelings, not burden them with yours. You became the emotional thermostat, the one who sensed the temperature of the room and adjusted yourself to keep everyone comfortable. That's not maturity, that's survival, and your nervous system learned a devastating lesson. Your worth depends on how useful you are to others. Your safety comes from making sure everyone around you is okay. Your identity becomes inextricably linked to being the helper, the listener, the one who always understands. So you carry that pattern into adulthood. You collect broken people like some people collect stamps. You're drawn to those who are struggling, who need fixing, who will depend on your emotional labor to stay afloat. And at first it feels good. It feels like purpose. It feels like proof that you matter, that your existence has meaning, that someone needs you in ways your family never did. But here's what's really happening beneath the surface. You're not actually connecting with these people. You're performing. You're playing a role that keeps you safe from the terrifying vulnerability of being truly seen. Because if you're always the helper, you never have to be the one who needs help. If you're always listening, you never have to speak. If you're always strong, you never have to reveal how fractured you really are inside. Psychologists call this codependency. It's when your sense of self becomes so entangled with others that you lose track of where you end and they begin. You measure your worth by how much you can give, how many people you can save, how indispensable you can make yourself. But codependency isn't love. It's fear dressed up as generosity. It's the desperate need to be needed because somewhere deep down you don't believe anyone would want you just for being you. Think about how this shows up in your life. How many times have you dropped everything to help someone, even when you barely had the energy to function yourself? How many times have you listened to someone's problems for hours while your own pain sat quietly in the corner, waiting for permission to speak? How many times have you cancelled your own plans, ignored your own needs, silenced your own voice because someone else's crisis felt more important? That's not selflessness. That's self-erasure. And here's the cruel irony. The more you give, the more people expect you to give. They start to see you not as a person with your own struggles, but as a resource to be tapped whenever they're in need. They text you when they're upset, but disappear when you need them. They trauma dump without asking if you have the capacity to hold it. They take and take and take, and you let them because somewhere along the way you convinced yourself that giving is all you're good for. This creates a toxic dynamic. Because now your friendships aren't reciprocal, they're transactional. People come to you when they're broken and leave when they're healed. And you're left wondering why you always feel so empty after supposedly meaningful conversations. You tell yourself you don't need anything in return. You say you're just happy to help. But deep down, there's a part of you that's screaming. That part wonders why no one ever asks how you're doing. That part notices when people only reach out when they need something. That part feels used, invisible, fundamentally unseen beneath the role you've been playing for so long. But you silence that part. You tell it it's selfish. You tell it that real friends don't keep score, that giving should be unconditional, that you should be grateful people trust you enough to be vulnerable. And so you bury your resentment, you swallow your needs, you keep showing up for everyone else while slowly disappearing from your own life. There's a concept in psychology called compassion fatigue. It's what happens when you give so much emotional energy to others that you have nothing left for yourself. Healthcare workers experience it, therapists experience it, and so do people who've made emotional caretaking their entire identity. The symptoms look like this. You start to feel numb, even when you're supposedly helping someone. You go through the motions of listening and supporting, but inside you're detached, exhausted, barely present. You become irritable, resentful of the very people you're supposed to care about. You start to dread their messages, their calls, their crises, because you know what's coming. Another hour of your life spent managing someone else's emotions while your own pile up like unread emails. Another conversation where you give everything and receive nothing. Another reminder that you're valued for what you do, not for who you are, and yet you can't stop. Because if you stop, if you set boundaries, if you say no, then who are you? What's your purpose if you're not the one everyone turns to? That's the addiction part. Being the therapist friend becomes a compulsion. You need to be needed because without that role, you feel worthless, invisible, like you've lost your only claim to maturity in other people's lives. So you keep going. You keep giving. You keep sacrificing yourself on the altar of other people's healing while your own wounds fester in the dark. But here's what happens when you live like this for too long. Your own emotional life atrophies. You become so focused on everyone else's feelings that you lose touch with your own. You don't even know what you need anymore. You've spent so long deciphering other people's pain that you've forgotten how to name your own. Sadness, anger, fear, they all blend into a vague background noise you've learned to ignore. And when someone does ask how you're doing, you don't know what to say. You've become so good at deflecting, at turning the conversation back to them, that vulnerability feels foreign, dangerous, almost impossible. So you say you're fine, you smile, you change the subject, and they let you because people get comfortable with the roles we play, and your role is the strong one, the helper, the therapist friend who never needs therapy. This is where the psychology gets dark. Because what you're actually doing is recreating the conditions of your childhood. You're still that little kid managing everyone else's emotions while yours get ignored. You're still proving your worth through service. You're still terrified that if you stop being useful, you'll stop being loved. And so you trap yourself in a cycle that feels like compassion, but is actually self-destruction. Let's talk about what this pattern really costs. First, it destroys your sense of self. When you spend all your time in other people's emotional worlds, you lose contact with your own inner life. You don't develop your own interests, pursue your own goals, or nurture your own dreams because you're too busy managing everyone else's. Your identity becomes a collection of roles you play for others, and beneath those roles, there's nothing. Second, it ruins your relationships, because real intimacy requires reciprocity. It requires both people to be vulnerable, to give and receive, to see and be seen. But when you're always the therapist, you never let anyone see the real you. You never give them the chance to hold your pain, support your dreams, or love you for something other than your usefulness. So your relationships stay surface level even when they feel deep. People know you as the helper, the listener, the wise one. But they don't actually know you. They don't know what keeps you up at night. They don't know what you're afraid of. They don't know the parts of you that are still wounded, still struggling, still desperately in need of care. And that loneliness, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who think they know you but don't, that's one of the most devastating forms of isolation there is. Because you're invisible even in rooms full of people who claim to love you. Third, this pattern breeds resentment. No matter how much you tell yourself you don't need anything in return, the truth is you do. You're human, and humans need reciprocity, validation, care. So when you give endlessly and receive nothing, resentment builds. It starts small, a tiny flicker of annoyance when someone texts you at a bad time. But it grows. You start keeping mental tallies of who's there for you and who isn't. You notice patterns, how some people only reach out when they need something, how others disappear the moment they're okay again. And eventually that resentment turns inward. You start hating yourself for feeling this way. You tell yourself you're selfish, petty, that you should be happy to help. But the resentment doesn't go away. It festers. And one day it erupts, maybe as a passive-aggressive comment, maybe as a sudden withdrawal, maybe as a breakdown where everything you've been holding finally comes spilling out. Fourth, being the therapist friend keeps you stuck in your own pain. Because when you're constantly focused on others, you never have to face yourself. You never have to do the hard work of healing your own wounds. It's easier to fix someone else's life than to fix your own. It's easier to give advice than to take it. It's easier to be strong for others than to admit you're falling apart. So you use helping as an escape. Every time your own pain gets too loud, you find someone else to save. And in the process, you never actually heal. You just become really good at distracting yourself. You become an expert at everyone else's psychology while remaining a stranger to your own. And years pass and you wonder why you still feel so empty inside. Here's what most people don't understand about the therapist-friend dynamic. It's not actually about the people you're helping. It's about you. It's about what you're avoiding, what you're proving, what you're trying to earn. You're trying to earn love by being indispensable. You're trying to prove you're worthy by being useful. You're trying to avoid rejection by making sure people need you too much to leave. But love that's earned isn't really love. It's a transaction. And deep down, you know that. You know that if you stopped helping, some of these people would disappear. And that knowledge, that fear of being abandoned the moment you're no longer useful, that's what keeps you trapped. Because as exhausting as this pattern is, it feels safer than the alternative. The alternative is being vulnerable. It's asking for help. It's admitting you don't have all the answers. It's risking rejection by showing people the parts of you that aren't strong, wise, or together. And that feels terrifying, because what if you reach out and no one's there? What if you ask for support and people are too busy? What if you finally let yourself be seen and it turns out you're not as lovable as you thought? So you stay in the role. You keep helping. You keep giving. And you tell yourself it's noble, that it's who you are, that you don't mind. But you do mind. You mind every time you're exhausted and someone asks for one more favor. You mind every time you're struggling and no one notices. You mind every time you realize that you've built a life where everyone knows you, but nobody really sees you. And that's the dark side of being the therapist friend. It's not the burden of helping. It's the burden of hiding. It's the exhaustion of performing strength while your inner world is collapsing. It's the loneliness of being surrounded by people who need you but don't know you. It's the resentment that builds when you realize your role in people's lives is transactional, not relational. It's the slow erosion of self that happens when you give everything away and keep nothing for yourself. Let's dig deeper into why this pattern is so hard to break. Part of it is identity. If you've been the therapist friend for years, maybe decades, it's become who you are. Your entire sense of self is built on being the helper. Your worth is measured by how much you can give. Your value is determined by how many people depend on you. So when you think about setting boundaries, about saying no, about putting yourself first, it doesn't just feel uncomfortable. It feels like annihilation, like you're losing the only thing that makes you matter. That's why people stay in this pattern even when it's killing them. Because the alternative, not knowing who you are without the role, feels worse. And so they sacrifice themselves to preserve an identity that was never really theirs to begin with. Another reason this pattern persists is fear of conflict. Therapist friends are often people pleasers. They avoid confrontation at all costs. They'd rather suffer in silence than risk upsetting someone. So when people take advantage of them, when friendships become one-sided, when boundaries need to be set, they stay quiet. They swallow their frustration. They convince themselves it's not that bad. And people, consciously or not, learn to take advantage of that. They learn that you'll always say yes, always be available, always prioritize their needs over your own. And why wouldn't they? You've trained them to see you that way. You've never shown them any different. And so the dynamic continues, reinforced by your silence, your compliance, your fear of being seen as anything other than endlessly giving. There's also a deeper psychological mechanism at play. For many therapist friends, helping others is a way of healing themselves vicariously. They give to others what they wish someone had given to them. Every time they comfort someone, they're comforting the part of themselves that was never comforted. Every time they validate someone's pain, they're validating their own. Every time they show up for someone, they're proving that people should have shown up for them. It's a form of repetition compulsion. They're trying to rewrite their own story by being the person they needed but never had. But here's the problem with that. You can't heal yourself by healing others. Vicarious healing doesn't work. You can spend your entire life being the perfect friend, the perfect listener, the perfect support system, and still feel just as broken inside. Because the wound isn't in other people, it's in you. And until you turn your attention inward, until you give yourself the care you've been giving everyone else, that wound will never heal. That's the trap. You think helping others will fill the emptiness inside you. You think if you're good enough, kind enough, patient enough, eventually you'll feel whole. But it doesn't work that way. The emptiness stays, the loneliness persists, and you're left exhausted, resentful, and wondering why, despite all your giving, you still feel so utterly alone. So what does healing look like for the therapist friend? It starts with something uncomfortable. It starts with acknowledging that this pattern, as noble as it seems, is actually a form of self-abandonment. It's admitting that you've been using helping as a shield, a distraction, a way to avoid the terrifying work of facing yourself. And that's not a moral failing. It's a survival strategy that once kept you safe but now keeps you stuck. The first step is learning to recognize your own needs. For so long, you've been tuned into everyone else's feelings that you've lost touch with your own. So you have to practice. You have to sit with yourself and ask, what do I need right now? What am I feeling? What do I want? And at first, the answers won't come easily. You've silenced that inner voice for so long that it's learned to stay quiet. But if you keep asking, if you keep listening, eventually that voice will start to speak. And when it does, your job is to honor it. Not to judge it, not to silence it, but to listen to it the way you've listened to everyone else. Second, you have to set boundaries. And I know how terrifying that sounds. I know you're afraid that if you say no, people will leave, that if you're not constantly available, you'll lose your worth. But here's what you need to understand. People who only value you for what you give aren't really in your life. They're using your life as a resource, and keeping them around is costing you everything. Real friends, the kind worth having, will respect your boundaries. They'll understand when you say, I don't have the capacity right now. They'll appreciate you for who you are, not just what you do. And yes, some people will get upset. Some will push back. Some will accuse you of being selfish or changing or not being the friend you used to be. And that's okay. Let them go. Because every person who leaves when you set boundaries is making room for someone who will actually see you, value you, love you without demanding you erase yourself in the process. Third, you have to practice asking for help. This is the hardest part, because for so long, you've been the strong one, the capable one, the one who has it all together. But the truth is, you don't. Nobody does. And pretending otherwise is what's keeping you isolated. So start small. Ask a friend to listen. Admit when you're struggling. Let people see that you're human, that you have needs, that you're not a bottomless well of support. And yes, it will feel vulnerable. It will feel like you're breaking some unspoken rule. But that vulnerability is what real connection is built on. It's what allows people to see you, not the role you play. And it's what will finally let you experience the reciprocity you've been craving all along. Fourth, you have to grieve. You have to grieve the relationships that were never real. You have to mourn the years you spent giving to people who never gave back. You have to sit with the anger, the resentment, the sadness of realizing that you've been invisible to people who claim to love you. And that grief, it's going to hurt, but it's necessary. Because you can't move forward while you're still pretending the past was okay. You can't build new healthy relationships while you're still clinging to ones that were slowly destroying you. So let yourself feel it. Let yourself be angry at the people who took advantage of your kindness. Let yourself be sad that you spent so long being someone you're not. Let yourself be hurt that your needs were never prioritized the way you prioritized everyone else's. And then, slowly, start to forgive. Not them necessarily, but yourself. Forgive yourself for staying in the pattern, for not knowing better, for believing that your worth was tied to your usefulness. Because you were doing the best you could with what you knew. You were surviving the only way you knew how, and that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to honor. Fifth, you have to rebuild your identity. You have to figure out who you are when you're not helping. What do you like? What do you want? What brings you joy that has nothing to do with being needed? This is the scariest part, because for so long, Your identity has been built on being the therapist friend. And now you're being asked to let that go, to step into the unknown of becoming someone new. But that unknown, as terrifying as it is also where freedom lives. It's where you get to discover the parts of yourself that have been buried under years of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. It's where you get to build a life that's yours, not a life that's shaped by everyone else's needs. And that life, though it might feel strange at first, is what you've been searching for all along. You don't have to stop being kind. You don't have to stop caring. But you do have to stop using kindness as a way to avoid yourself. You have to learn that your worth isn't determined by how much you give, that your value doesn't come from being needed, that you deserve love, care and support just for existing, not for what you can do for others. And when you finally believe that, when you finally internalize that truth, everything changes. You stop attracting people who want to use you. You start attracting people who want to know you. You stop feeling exhausted by your relationships. You start feeling nourished by them. You stop living in the shadows of everyone else's lives. You start showing up in your own. That's the promise of healing. Not that you'll become someone different, but that you'll finally become yourself. The self you were before you learned to disappear. The self that knows how to give without losing itself in the process. The self that can hold space for others while also holding space for itself. The self that understands that helping people is beautiful, but sacrificing yourself to do it is not. Because here's the final truth about being the therapist friend. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't heal others when you're broken yourself. You can't be a light for others when you're living in darkness. So the most radical thing you can do, the most loving thing, is to turn some of that care inward, to give yourself the same compassion you've been giving everyone else. To listen to your own pain with the same patience you've shown others. That's not selfish. That's survival. That's what it means to be truly whole. And when you do that, when you finally heal yourself first, your capacity to help others expands exponentially. Not because you're trying to prove something, not because you're afraid of being abandoned, but because you're overflowing with love, and sharing it comes naturally, joyfully, without depleting you. That's the difference between helping from wholeness and helping from woundedness. One gives life, the other slowly kills you, and you get to choose which one you want to be. So if you've been the therapist friend for too long, if you've spent years giving everything and keeping nothing, if you're exhausted, resentful, and wondering when it's your turn to be seen, let this be your permission. Permission to say no. Permission to set boundaries. Permission to ask for help. Permission to be human, flawed, and in need of care just like everyone else. You've spent so long taking care of others. It's time to take care of yourself, not someday, not when everyone else is okay, now. Because you matter, not for what you do, not for how you help, but simply because you exist. And that's enough. That's always been enough. You just forgot. And now, finally, you get to remember. You get to come home to yourself. You get to rest. And in that rest, in that quiet reclaiming of your own life, you'll discover something beautiful. That the person you've been searching for, the one who will finally see you, who will hold you, who will love you without condition, has been there all along. It's you. It's always been you. And you're finally ready to meet yourself. Not the helper, not the therapist friend, just you. Perfectly imperfect, worthy of love, deserving of care, finally free.